Imagine the ocean at night, a flat, endless darkness stretching out in every direction, broken only by the slow rise and fall of waves. The water moves in a rhythm that feels ancient, a rhythm that has repeated long before humans learned to write, before the first cities rose from the earth, before history had a name. The moon casts a silver path across the water, and for a moment the surface looks almost like glass. Now imagine sinking beneath it, past the ripples, past the currents, down where sunlight cannot reach. And down there, in the cold, quiet dark, imagine something impossible. The outline of streets, the curves of walls, the shape of a city that should not exist. A city swallowed whole in a single day and night. A place where temples once shone with precious metals, where ships crowded into wide circular harbors, where kings ruled from a palace ringed by water. A city that, according to legend, vanished so completely that only a story remains. For more than 2,000 years, the name Atlantis has drifted through human imagination like a ghost. It appears in novels, in films, in documentaries, in late-night conversations and childhood daydreams. It is the idea of a perfect world lost, a warning about pride, a symbol of the unknown, and a temptation that refuses to fade. Tonight, you're not diving into the Atlantis of animated movies or science fiction fantasies. You're stepping into the Atlantis that emerges from ancient texts, geological mysteries, half-buried ruins, and the fragile boundary where memory meets myth. The Atlantis that philosophers use to illustrate moral lessons, and the Atlantis that scientists sometimes glimpse in the scars left by real disasters. And as you walk through this world, slowly, carefully, you'll discover the three questions that have kept Atlantis alive for centuries. Was any part of it real? If not, what inspired it? And why, after all this time, do we still want it to be? Let the waves fade. Let the night ocean dissolve into dawn. Because our journey begins not in the water, but in ancient Athens. To understand Atlantis, you have to picture a man sitting in a quiet courtyard, surrounded by the sounds of an Athenian evening. Sandals scuffing on stone, the distant murmur of a marketplace closing for the day, the soft clink of pottery cooling after dinner. His name is Plato, one of the most influential thinkers in Western history. Plato didn't write lectures or scientific manuals. He wrote dialogues, imagined conversations where ideas came alive through debate, storytelling, and questions that often led to other questions. The story of Atlantis appears in just two of these dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. Nowhere else in ancient Greek writing. No earlier mentions. No independent confirmations. That's our first clue that Atlantis is unusual. In these dialogues, Plato doesn't simply state the story. He presents it as something already old, something passed down through several hands. He writes that the Athenian lawgiver Solon traveled to Egypt, learned the tale from priests there, and intended to bring it back to Greece but never completed it. Solon told it to a relative who carried it further. And now Plato sets it down in writing. It's a story nested inside a story, wrapped in an air of secrecy and age. Feels like something whispered, not announced. Now imagine hearing Plato's tale the way an ancient listener might have, not as fantasy, but as a distant and solemn memory. He describes Atlantis as a great island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar. Beyond that narrow threshold, out in the open Atlantic, lay a world of mountains, rivers, fertile plains, and people with wealth beyond imagining. And at the center of that world stood its capital, a city designed in concentric rings. Land, water, like ripples spreading from a stone tossed into a pond. The outer ring hosted the harbors, always filled with ships and the smell of salt and tar. Bridges arched over the water channels. Houses lined the curved roads. Guards them. Let's slow down. Step inside the city itself. Imagine walking through Atlantis as Plato describes it. First you enter the outermost ring, a broad canal encircling the city like a moat. Ships glide past, their sails embroidered with symbols of the 10 royal families. You hear the sound of ropes slapping against wooden masts, sailors shouting orders, metal tools ringing against stone as workers repair hulls. The smell of fish, seawater, and warm wood fills the air. Cross a bridge, and you enter the next ring, a bustling district of houses and workshops. You pass metalworkers stirring coals, potters shaping amphorae, and merchants bargaining over bundles of cloth. Children chase each other through narrow alleys while guards march in pairs, their armor catching glimpses of the sun. Closer to the center, the houses grow larger. Gardens appear. Trees line the paths, their branches trembling in the breeze. You hear running water from fountains fed by natural springs, hot and cold, flowing through channels that blur the line between architecture and nature. Now you cross another bridge. You step onto the smallest island of all. This is the sacred core of Atlantis. The temple of Poseidon rises before you. Its walls glow with orichalcum plates. Columns of black and red stone reach toward the sky. Inside, the air is cool and still. You hear the faint echo of water dripping somewhere deep. And there, in the center of the hall, stands the statue. Poseidon driving 6 winged horses, surrounded by carvings of sea creatures and ancient kings. It is a place designed to overwhelm, to impress, to remind you of power. Whether Atlantis ever existed or not, Plato paints a city you can nearly touch. Now the scene changes again. The warm colors of Atlantis fade. We zoom out, looking not at the city but at the timeline. Because Plato places Atlantis 9,000 years before Solon. If taken literally, that means around 11,600 years ago. And here's the problem. Archaeology tells us that at that time, humans were mostly small communities of hunter-gatherers. No known cities. No palaces. No naval empires. No monumental temples plated with metal. Serious scholars interpret Plato's huge number not as literal but symbolic. Ancient writers sometimes used grand, exaggerated ages to give their stories a sense of immeasurable antiquity. It was their way of saying, "This happened so long ago you can't even imagine it." Still, that massive number is part of Atlantis's magic. It pushes the story beyond the edge of recorded time. It suggests a lost chapter of civilization. Many documentaries build their suspense around that idea. Maybe, just maybe, something once existed that we have no record of. Something erased so completely that only a philosopher's dialogue preserved its shadow. But shadows come from something. And sometimes the earth itself provides the clues. Now let's step away from myth and into geology. The earth remembers everything. Volcanoes leave ash. Earthquakes leave broken layers of rock. Tsunamis leave debris far inland. And when scientists read these layers like pages in a book, they find stories as dramatic as Atlantis itself. One of the most powerful true stories comes from the Aegean Sea, from the island of Thera, modern Santorini. More than 3,000 years ago, Thera exploded. Not in a slow, simmering way, but in a sudden, catastrophic blow that darkened the sky for days. The center of the island collapsed into the sea. Mountains vaporized. Shock waves raced across the Mediterranean. Archaeologists digging on Santorini uncovered a frozen moment in time. The city of Akrotiri, covered in ash. Streets still lined with multi-story homes. Elaborate plumbing systems. Vivid frescoes showing ships, dolphins, festivals, flowers. These people were skilled sailors, traders, painters, and engineers. And then it ended. A world silenced in hours. Now imagine living in nearby Crete or along the Turkish coast when the tsunamis hit, walls of water taller than buildings. Entire ports torn apart. Towns erased. Stories of an island that exploded must have traveled far. They would have been told and retold for generations. The more time passed, the more symbolic the story might become. Shapes blur. Details merge. Memory becomes myth. Suddenly, the idea of a great island swallowed by the sea doesn't feel so far-fetched. Not as literal history, perhaps, but as a memory of real trauma. A memory Plato could have shaped. Now we move to modern times. For centuries, people have searched for Atlantis. They've looked on maps, in old books, on coastlines, and eventually beneath the ocean itself. And the world keeps offering strange hints, just enough to spark imagination. In southern Spain, near the Dinana wetlands, satellite images showed circular shapes beneath the ground. They look, from the air, like faded rings, almost like the outline of Plato's city. This discovery led to expeditions. Archaeologists, geologists, radar teams, drones flying low over dry marshland. Researchers found signs of ancient harbor towns submerged over time. They found walls, ceramics, foundations, evidence of a real maritime culture that suffered repeated floods. But nothing definitive. Nothing with the exact layout. Still, the shapes are there. Inviting. Mysterious. Then there's Santorini and Crete, connected to the Minoan civilization. Some argue the Minoans were the inspiration. A sea-loving people undone by a sudden natural catastrophe. But again, the details don't match perfectly. Other theories push Atlantis into the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, the Sahara, Antarctica, even space. Most of these claims stretch evidence to the breaking point. But they reveal something important. Atlantis is the perfect mystery. Just specific enough to tease. Just vague enough to survive every failed discovery. Every time someone says, "We've found it," the story grows stronger. Every time someone says, "It never existed," the legend digs deeper into the imagination. Let's pause the excitement. Let's step back. The scholarly view is steady and clear. Plato is the only ancient primary source for Atlantis. He often wrote fictional stories to explore philosophical ideas. No archaeological site matches his description exactly. And the story aligns closely with themes he used repeatedly. Pride, corruption, moral decline. Most historians see Atlantis as an allegory. A dramatic example used to show how even the greatest civilizations fall when they chase expansion and excess. But scholars also recognize something else. Plato's fiction often blends with real observations. He lived in a world where cities had been destroyed by earthquakes, where islands did vanish under the sea, where tsunamis reshaped coasts. He may have woven these real experiences into an imaginary empire. In this sense, Atlantis is both unreal and deeply human. A myth built from true fragments. So picture the ocean again. Night, waves rolling in and out. Nothing visible but darkness and moonlight. Somewhere beneath those waves, perhaps there is no orichalcum, no ringed metropolis, no shining temple. But there are real ruins, not of a single mythical empire, but of countless forgotten places, swallowed by time, disaster, and the restless sea. Atlantis may not be a map location. It may not be waiting for discovery. But it is real in another way. Real as a warning. Real as a dream. Real as the echoes of civilizations that rose, flourished, and fell long before we opened our history books. The power of Atlantis isn't in whether it existed. It's in what it reveals about us. That we fear loss. That we hope for hidden wonders. That we are drawn to mysteries we may never solve. And maybe that's why the waves still feel like they're hiding something. Why the ocean still seems like a doorway. Why the story of Atlantis continues to drift just out of reach, shaping itself every time someone dares to ask, what if something really was there once? Because myths fade, cities fall, but the sea remembers. Atlantis may be lost beneath the waves, but the questions it raises are still with us. What stories are hidden just out of reach, waiting to be discovered? What mysteries of the past could change the way we see the world today? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Atlantis was real? Or is it purely a legend? Share your ideas in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into history, myth, and the unknown, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us for more stories that make the past come alive.